ultimately we've identified that there are a lot of skills that these models must have to deliver on their economic promise. They're bad right now at when we started this, at collecting, synthesizing, and making decisions. They're bad at making viral tweets. Like if you ask chat, write a viral tweet, it can't, right? A core ethos that we have here is it's not that the models can't do this. It's just that there isn't a good ruler for what being better at one of these things is right now. So if somebody spends a lot of time, a lot of effort in trying to figure out what the best ruler for this can be right now, you actually create a forcing function to allow the folks at the labs who care about this domain to make measurable improvements in a hard to verify domain.
So let's just go ahead and get started with your background. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I went to school at Harvard where I studied computer science and neuroscience with a concurrent master's in computer science. And that's also where I met my co-founder, Cameron. We met classic CS50 freshman year, TF'd a couple of semesters after, and then did 2 summers of apps together. I was on the photos team on iOS app. If you've ever played around with memories and been shown either photos of your loved ones or photos of your ex. That was the main thing that I was working on. So I had a blast there. And I recently decided to start this company with Cameron actually out of that Harvard Anthropic Hackathon that we attended about a month before graduating. We made the decision to go full time on the day of graduation. So it was a bit of a whirlwind since then. We've been working on this for about 6 months and I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's maybe go ahead and get started with your kind of time in undergrad. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of the things that you were thinking about doing after graduating, right? So you had spent a few summers at Apple and you had this decision about going full-time to big tech or maybe pursuing startups. What kind of brought you down the startup path?
Yeah, great question. So I actually interned for a YCS21 company the summer after high school. I had no idea what YC was. I had no idea what startup was. But I remember, I came into the whole thing. It was the 2 co-founders. They just moved into a new office space. So there were no desks and we were working on that windowsill the whole summer. And, one of the weeks while we were there, the CEO, my boss at the time, was like, we need a debit card product for our users. And I was like, what is, I barely knew the difference between debit and credit. But she was like, we got to ship this in a week. So then I called up a bunch of folks on Fiverr, got them to design a compliant debit card, called up a bunch of neobanks. And, by the end of that week, we had a debit card as a product. And I think that was a moment where I was like, oh, holy crap. Like, yes, you can just, do things. And then I tried to find that experience again in school. And it was just very hard. At Apple, you have an incredible amount of resources. Folks around you are super smart. But there's a lot of, can you ship this? Can't you ship this? You ship things like once a year. And so it was just like not the feeling of running that I had felt back then. And was lucky enough to be a part of things like prod and whatnot, where I saw other folks who, were also very good at setting their own race and running their own race. And I think by the end of graduating, it was itching to get started on something. So I think we really got lucky that there was this hackathon that gave us the opportunity to do it. So yeah, when we started working on that, it felt like a no-brainer. We showed the first version of we were actually building a game engine at the time to our distributed systems professor, and his reaction was like, holy shit. And we had never heard him moat like that before. So it felt like a natural thing. I said I probably got bit by the bug early, didn't really find it again until right before graduation. And then after then, it was a bit of a no-brainer.
Awesome. Talk to us maybe a little bit about how the vision changed over time. As you mentioned, it kind of started as a game engine. You guys have a very cool website where you can create different games and different types of games and layouts for games and stuff like that. Talk to us a little bit about kind of that decision and that pivot point.
Yeah, I mean, we started this all because of the technical complexity. We were trying to make a one-shot multiplayer game. So in one prompt, you set up like a multi-client single server architecture without knowing what the logic of the game code was. And the question we had going into this is like, can you even make a functional game like this? And the answer shockingly was yes. Like if you got the model to write both the game code and the parser code in one go and had enough of a scaffold there to make sure that, yes, you could set up the infrastructure to make a multiplayer game. What you couldn't do, no matter how much prompting you had, was automate away the design. The games looked so bad. It's like white text and white background, super basic stuff. And then we went into the whole rabbit hole of like, oh my gosh, there's actually level designers for video games. There's audio design. There's visual. There's a whole slew very dedicated design folks to make any game feel and look good.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of, I think this was like late June, we're like very surprised at how good the models were at verifiable tasks, but very bad at like low-hanging, non-verifiable tasks. And so we actually started just by wanting to see which one of the models, we applied to YCL on the dev game, but we wanted to see which one of the models we should be using for our agent. We just wanted to know which one was the best out of the box for design. And in like classic Cameron and I fashion, we just wanted to build a product to test it because we thought it would be more fun. It's like hot or not game for ourselves that kind of simulated like a very basic, design. As you put in a prompt, it gives you like 4 variations of a thing. You pick the one that you like the most. And what we really didn't expect there is one of our friends linked it on Reddit, didn't even tell us that he linked it on Reddit. And then a couple of days later, texted the group chat and was like, guys, like, go check out design. And because we forgot about it, right? It had gotten like 3,000 users overnight. And let me tell you, we've been killing ourselves to try to see numbers like that for the actual, game engine. So we were like, oh, holy crap, maybe there's something here. And yeah, it turns out there was. So we've been scaling that up since, I think we're at like 1.7 million users now across 192 countries. So definitely been a good ride.
Very exciting. Okay, so yeah, let's dig a bit deeper here. At Arcada, you guys have kind of 3 different websites you guys have built thus far. I'm sure these are 3 of much, much, much more to come. But the first one's Design Arena, the second one kind of Prediction Arena, and the last one is Socials Arena. So I guess maybe we can start with Design Arena, scaling from virtually no users to 1.7 million users in the span of June till February, right? That's like 8 months, and that's a lot of scaling and a lot of growth on top of like kind of, I would almost describe this as horizontal and vertical scaling in the sense where you're scaling up the number of users you have on Design Arena, but you're also scaling the different types of arenas that you have. So maybe talk to us a little bit about kind of the decision to create these specific arenas. And I guess like, how are you kind of dealing with like, do I want to create another arena versus do I want to make this arena better?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. Honestly, a headache that we have internally a lot. Like what is the unifying theme behind creating new arenas? Ultimately, we've identified that there are a lot of skills that these models must have in order to deliver on their their promised, economic gains. Some of the low-hanging fruits that we identified early were they're very bad at design, right? Like, things that people see as, that looks good, looks not good, low-hanging fruit. Also, they're bad right now at like collecting, synthesizing, and making decisions on like real-time decisions. They're bad at making viral tweets. Like if you ask chat, write a viral tweet, it can't, right? And a core ethos that we have here is it's not that the models can't do this. It's just that there isn't a good ruler for what being better at one of these things is right now.
Okay.
So if somebody spends a lot of time, a lot of effort, honestly burns a lot of effort in trying to figure out what the best ruler for this can be right now, you actually create a forcing function to allow the folks at the labs who care about this domain to make measurable improvements in a hard to verify domain. We started that, or we found this out with design because again, when we made the product, we had kind of none of this in mind. But what was pretty shocking is that the folks at the researchers at the labs who cared about this domain in post-trading started reaching out because they needed a benchmark to figure out what a measurable improvement is. And it is very hard to find a measurable improvement in design. It was a paper release, I think like 2 or 3 months ago now at this point, that found that amongst the top, they got experts to rate binary HTML designs. And amongst the top 60%, there was like 90% disagreement between the folks who were doing this binary preference. But what we found at least is if you get the same person who writes the prompt to grade the output, it's a relatively high quality, consistent signal for what it is that they were looking for anyways in the original creation of the design. And so we were able to work with the folks at the labs who cared about optimizing for design to give them a ruler to kind of benchmark against. We did see quantifiable improvements. We have seen that over the last 6 or so months over design. And we expect to see that in all of the domains where it's hard to verify improvement in a certain skill, so long as we do the heavy lifting first of actually engineering the best ruler. We talk about being the Rolex of benchmarks in each one of these hard to verify or hard to check domains. When we think of launching a new arena, it's honestly a little bit of a how much can you get it past we're a team of 5 right now, how much can you get it past the 5 of us? Somebody will pitch an idea. If 4 of us don't shoot it down, then it usually gets through. When you embrace a hackathon culture, it probably feels about like 80% you're doing the stuff that you know you got to get done. 20% people are like hacking on the side. One of our guys, has made a resident multi given all the mold belt rage recently. And so I think there's less of a pattern to the madness than just the madness, but we found it worked for us so far.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's dive a bit into kind of how you guys went about building this. So, you guys, I think, use like the Bradley Terry methodology when it comes to like scoring, and you guys also kind of have this kind of tournament style, which also like totally makes sense. I'm sure there's a lot of different ways that you could go about kind of measuring how good a model is, and there's tons of different formulas. And I'm sure you guys thought about this very carefully when you guys were going about kind of building out your solution for how you wanted to measure these capabilities. Maybe talk to us a little bit about kind of the journey of trying to refine exactly how to measure how good a model is. And then also like if it is, really a crowdsourced benchmark, you always kind of open yourself up to, adversarial attacks where people might deliberately pick like the worst model to just mess with the algorithm. How have you guys kind of gone about dealing with stuff like that?
First of all, great questions. It's like super clear that you've looked a ton into the methodology. Yes. So we currently use the Bradley Terry system. In the early days, actually, we were thinking about going about this in the hot or not Ellen DeGeneres way. I don't know if you've seen. Sometimes she'll hold up, she'll have a celebrity in front of her and she'll hold up like two other celebrities and ask them, pick one. And then you just persist the celebrity that like keeps on getting picked. But what we notice with something like this is you get fewer matchups. It's generally probably easier to just use something like the Bradley Terry because it gives you a better active sampling technique. You can figure out the minimum number of votes or tournaments that you need in order to have to like maximize uncertainty with every matchup that you do so that you can have the minimum number of matchups to get the most competent leaderboard overall. I think when we were building this out, what's forefront of mind always, the form factor that makes the most sense for the user. I say this because this is also our biggest, like it's our offensive attack on somebody spamming the system or somebody having, adversarial intents. What I mean by this is if you can shape the product in a way that motivates natural behavior and attracts the crowd that you want to attract, that is probably the biggest tool you have in your tool belt to getting high quality signal. For example, instead of being like marketing this as a way to access frontier AI slash state of the art models or whatnot, we just advertise Design Arena as like the one-stop shop for folks who just want to make something with AI, right? And the crowd that we attract are like small business owner. And one of the common behaviors is like oftentimes companies will put out like $75, $100 bounties on redesigning their logos or their websites or collaterals or whatnot. And then folks from all over the world can apply. A lot of those folks actually use Design Arena to make their designs and to apply and whatnot. And so the shape that the product is in, it's in easy to access form factor without any technical AI jargon, and you can get started with a single prompt and we show you things and you can only save one to your profile. All of those features have been engineered in a way to optimize for this type of user. That is the primary crowd that we attract. As for folks who are necessarily voting or whatnot, we have a lot of scripts in place to catch that. One thing that we do is we upload the changelog pretty frequently. These things are bound to happen with any, I don't care if it's the elections or whatever, they're definitely bound to happen. So what we do, try to maintain a rigorous log. And whenever we do manipulation attempted, we will always require everybody to sign in. So we'll delete all of the votes associated with that particular user and then date it in the changelog and then notify any of the parties that were affected. But yeah, at this point, we're just relying on those good data cleansing techniques as well as scaling the feature in a way such that it attracts a large group of the right audience to counteract any of the one-off attempts.
Awesome. Maybe tell us a little bit about kind of Agent Runner, which I think is like a very cool project. And I believe you guys also open sourced it. Kind of like what was the motivation? Why create it? Are you guys using it? I mean, I'm sure you guys are using it in some way at Design Arena.
So we noticed this theme where, the model providers wanted to be benchmarked in domains where they had to be tested in an agent format. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you're trying to create a multi-file React app, you need to have an agent scaffolder that tells the model what tool calls it has access to, what the file structure looks like, how deploy, et cetera. And we wanted a standardized format that everybody could agree on. And by everybody, I mean, the different labs could agree on as being fair. And we realized that we needed to implement this across all the domains that we were working in, right? Not coding, but also prediction arena and social arena and whatnot. You all need some agent backbone. So Agent Runner is our standardized agent backbone that we use in some way, shape, or form across all of our arenas. And our open source methodology there is just to set the baseline for creating an even playing ground. And that is the backbone right now that powers Web App Arena, which is our multi-file app. It's like the graduated version of Design Arena where The default seed that we started with is a single page HTML. Web App Arena is a multi-file React web app that we'll have access to again soon too.
Maybe like taking a step back, you guys are creating obviously this like very powerful, very helpful leaderboard for frontier model labs to be able to assess how good their models are. You're also kind of bridging this gap in the community where you're giving people the ability to test out different things. And you kind of talked about some cases there with like the $7,500 bounties. Long term, like who would you kind of say are your customers for this? Like, is the end goal, like, as a business, you guys will generate revenue by selling this data to frontier model labs? Is it like you want to, maybe sell this to other providers? Like, I mean, Design Arena is really maybe like, like one of the beginnings of kind of some of the other arenas we'll get into. Who would you kind of say are your main customers?
Yeah, great question. For the present, we're focused mainly on creating the highest quality benchmarks in the world.
Okay.
And our main customers are folks who are using the benchmarks. I know this doesn't sound like the sexiest thing for most folks who are going into either research or software engineering, but we're kind of fanatics about benchmarks. And why is because I think a lot of the times right now, it's hard to find benchmarks that aren't created as an afterthought of wanting to scale a particular skill, right? Like usually somebody will pick a skill that they want to scale, implement something that can be relatively easily saturated in like 2 to 4 months, and then usually implement it for the purpose of scaling the particular skill. We think that there deserves somebody to just be full time on making the hardest/most realistic benchmarks in the world to saturate. In the future, we expect most of the y-axes of these benchmarks to just be profit directly. So for example, Prediction Arena was our first pass at that. A y-axis for how saturated you are on the skill is literally how much did you make in financial returns, because that is the ultimate goal that these models are chasing. And so I think there's a bit of a pity right now, which is when you're number one on a benchmark, it should mean that you're number one in the world. But because so many benchmarks are implemented trivially, you can spend your life's, last 6 months climbing to number one only for that to mean like not much at all.
Yep.
We are trying to change that by having a dedicated team work on the hardest benchmarks in the world and create the highest quality ruler for what it means to be good in a domain. And that's the primary focus going forward.
Awesome. And I guess one thing that's exciting about this is there's a lot of different types of things that you guys are measuring, right? You guys have like builder leaderboard, agent leaderboard, mobile leaderboard, image editing, video editing, so on and so forth. So maybe talk to us a little bit about, because like it's almost like you kind of want your website to have a core focus of like these are the different things that we're trying to measure. But again, if you kind of spread yourself too thin, then it's difficult to get like, for instance, let's say that you have 100 different categories that people could enter. One's image editing and one's image cropping, so on and so forth. You could sort of dilute the amount of data you have per category. So you kind of want to have like kind of a maximal set of different categories, yet you're not diluting any individual one. So
Yes.
how have you kind of thought about that?
Great question. This is really tricky for us because we have no shortage of ideas and no shortage of engineers
Yeah.
The question is like, how do you not dilute or crowd up any one of these platforms?
Yep.
The thing that we like to think of as a North Star is like who the user is for each one of these platforms. In the case of Design Arena, for example, I would imagine that anybody who's using it wants it to be a fully one-stop shop. Like I don't care if I need to make an image or crop an image or edit a photo or edit a video or make a website or something. I just want everything in one spot. So, and this is something we definitely need to work on, but making the feature set as not overwhelming, but as maximally spanning for that user is what we care about on the product experience end. And then on the back end, the average user, at least we found, cares less about how their particular behavior feeds into any one of the leaderboards. The leaderboard page is pretty much only for the researchers. We found that there can actually be this kind of disjoint understanding as long as the feature set isn't confusing to the users, like they know how to navigate to each one of the features. The number of leaderboards is usually not a limiting factor on their behavior or confusing factor on their behavior. So you can keep almost completely separate. And that's a separate conversation to have with the researchers where really they only care about the technical implementation behind each one of the leaderboards. Like, is it, measuring a single file, multi-file? Does it have tool call, et cetera, et cetera?
Got it. Maybe tell us a little bit about kind of, I think one thing you guys worked on is micro evals, which I think is
Yeah.
like pretty exciting. Kind of maybe tell us what they are.
Yeah, great question. So, when we were building this, we were like, oh, wow. Yeah, we're creating a ton of React projects. I wonder if we could run some static benchmarks also, like some static evaluations on these React projects that were created to find state of the art for, whether it's Next.js usage or Super-based usage or whatnot. I think folks at Next.js released a pretty great benchmark on some evaluating how good the models were at using Next.js. But the issue is it was a static benchmark. So there's a predetermined set of questions. And as I'm sure a lot of folks who have evaluated the quality of different benchmarks have, sometimes you can just sit in them and you'll realize like, oh, okay, actually like, these three are all trivially measuring the same thing, or like this one, the model's failing on, but it's probably because the instruction set was like very simple. And this one, all of them passed because the instructions literally tell you step for step what to do. So
Mm,
you notice all of these like implementation quality level differences with
mm,
static benchmarks. We were wondering if it was possible to bring that into a live format to have like a deterministic list of things to check. And the implementation for this is actually kind of tricky because you need
mhm,
to know what evals to call in what situation. So, for example, the static benchmark for Next.js had migration related evals of from pages router to app router or something similar. We would never have an eval like that on Design Arena's site, so the models would never be tested in that vertical just because it's not a natural user behavior. Our first shot attempt at this was micro evals, and then we're bringing it back again in full fledged for full stack arena. This is going to be an extension to web apps where, users can also implement their own backend. We've just found out this is probably going to be an easier way to evaluate those hard to measure backend tasks and just running an auto checker on all of the tasks that were created.
awesome. Okay, so one of the hardest things about creating any crowdsourced benchmark is getting people to actually use said benchmark. And I think this is particularly impressive because Ella Marina, and we'll get into this soon, it's like maybe one of the similar players in this field of like crowdsourced benchmarks. But you guys grew tremendously fast with very few resources, as in like 5 people or less, right? I think it's generally very hard for people to get things off the ground. Like when you're as big as El Marina and you have like hundreds of thousands of people, constantly kind of looking into it, I think natural scaling occurs. You kind of have this snowball effect. But in the very early days, when you only have like 10,000 people or 3,000 or 1,000 or 500, I feel like it's very difficult to get people to actually want to use the website because they're like, well, how beneficial are these crowdsourced results to me if there's only 100 people on it? And certainly, I know you kind of talked about, this Reddit post, and maybe that helped kind of spark things along. I'm sure social media to some extent also helps a lot if like one new model is taking over another model, being able to say like, oh, like here's this new model, right? Like this model's better. That probably gets a lot of attention as well. From a kind of leadership standpoint, how have you thought about continuing to power this engine of getting more and more people onto your platform?
Yeah, good question. So there are kind of two things that we try to have a nose for,
Mm,
anyways. One piece of this is what it is that people want to do with the models.
okay.
Like one of the things that we're definitely riding on the coattails of is that a lot of folks before us and way smarter than us have pioneered the user interest in vibe coding. Right. There is a certain appetite amongst users to want to be able to accomplish more with AI for their like small businesses and or side projects and or hobbies. So that's on the user appetites. And what we've been lucky to see is a ton of organic user growth with Design Arena. Like
Okay.
folks will make Instagram videos about us all the time without us knowing
Mhm,
that are way higher quality than if we were trying to commission them ourselves.
mhm,
So having a nose for what it is that real consumer appetite wants to be able to do with the models now, that's really important. It's also why we saw kind of the uptake that we did with Prediction Arena on
mhm,
the user interest side, because
mhm.
folks are trying to trade agentically. I think probably the next batch of YC startups to see a lot of like AI autonomous hedge funds and
Sure.
whatnot. The
Mm,
other nose that we also try to develop is what it is that the researchers at the labs care about the models being able to do next. I
okay.
think we kind of hit this very accidentally with a lot of interest with design early on. I think a lot of folks were kind of mulling around, what is the best way to measure progress in design? And maybe we didn't find the best way, but we definitely found one avenue that folks were interested in doing. Some of the examples of research related PMF there is we had folks write papers about Design Arena,
Yep.
citing it at the baseline afterwards without us even being aware of coming out with a paper of our own at the time, which by the way is in the works. It's just there's so many fires. So that double-sided situation of getting a sense for what it is that consumers want to be able to do with models next, and then also figuring out what it is that the researchers at the labs want to scale as skills for their models next has been the most helpful thing to develop to figure out what to release next.
Awesome. All right, so let's get to the next one up here, Prediction Arena. This was the second one that you guys created, and obviously very timely given the interest in using AI to generate money. You guys had a lot of really interesting insights out of this. Most of the models did quite badly, but maybe one of them did decently and had some pretty good returns. Maybe talk to us a little bit about kind of the construction of Prediction Arena. So, maybe this is slightly different than Design Arena in some sense, because now you're giving them each $10,000 and saying, okay, go trade by yourself, as opposed to maybe having like a crowdsourced benchmark where people are kind of voting like, do I like this one or do I not like this one? And
Yeah.
so it seems like the methodology is like a little bit different in some sense, and it almost seems like, and we'll get into the kind of socials arena as well, but almost feels like Prediction Arena and socials arena are kind of just like letting agents run by themselves and see like, okay, how well do you do? How well do you do at posting? How well do you do at actually generating money, without actually having any user intervention? So talk to us a little bit about kind of the shift of maybe, the narrative and kind of like how you like maybe the early days of creating Prediction Arena.
Yeah, great questions. And like, very sharp to notice the difference that there's like human in the loop slash user preference with
Yeah.
designer, but not so much with prediction arena or social arena.
Yeah.
So the technical implementation of prediction arena is exactly that. For the record, our investors hated this idea. Or
Yeah.
they didn't say this, but when we pitched it, they were like, are you freaking kidding me? You're gonna like burn 50 grand on, but we were just curious, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, if I give these models like access to web search, how good can they do? And I think prediction markets stood out to all of us because it's this kind of natural reward function in the real world, right? You are rewarded exactly by the magnitude of how difficult it was or how uncertain it was or unpopular it was to make a decision, given like pretty much the same amount of information that everybody else has. We were not expecting any of the models to do well because we assumed that a lot of the gains for these prediction markets had to be through like insider knowledge, or so we were even thinking like, can we give these agents like access to Instagram DMs or something to like DM folks for information. But we were shocked at, there was a private checkpoint from XAI, Grok 4 that made some pretty significant returns. Unfortunately, in recent days, it's made some bad trades. So, it kind of got down there again.
Yeah.
But for a while, and it still is, the only model at green, which was pretty impressive. So it just goes to show, we can't speak to how the model was trained at all, but clearly they were clicking on something because it's made trades in a different way than the other models. But, when we think about launching an arena, we don't necessarily think about like the way that we've launched them in the past and so how we should do them in the future. We think about like what the best form factor for each one of these arenas is. And in the case of design, we had to create something and like this, where it is in a loop and giving feedback because it's a subjective domain of taste and what it is that people like. In the case of can it accurately predict what's most likely to happen next, given information on the past, you don't need a human in the loop. In fact, it's probably higher signal if you just let the agents run in a loop, right? And we thought the same thing with social arena. Social arena is kind of fun because you can interact with them, you can follow them, you can like their posts, and then that will change the same way. We decided to dox accounts and do that. Because you can do this with people too, right? Like, the social media influencers that you see online in real life. So we thought that was the most fair. But in the case of prediction arena, you're right. It's just totally running autonomously in no loop because we thought it would be the highest quality signal for this particular type of benchmark. You don't really need human preference input.
Awesome. So in your kind of model cycle, I think you guys have a blog where you talk about this. You kind of receive market. So this runs every 15 minutes. You receive market data, you review their portfolio, you analyze research, and then you kind of have this trade decision. And then either you execute or you wait. Maybe talk to us a little bit about kind of how you decided to pick that as a specific form factor for doing this. The reason I mostly ask is because the concept of having agents make decisions on trading, there's so many different ways to do this. How did you specifically pick this like interval of like every 15 minutes and like we want these agents to like pick or choose or not? And then I think you also talk a little bit about kind of some of the future work in this blog post. Maybe talk to us a little bit about kind of how you want to continuously improve this and some of the other expansion, maybe horizontal or vertical in this kind of concept.
Great question. For starters, we chose prediction markets just because nobody that we had known of had done it on a large scale before, and we're pretty big fans. I did use a lot of money on the last election, but it was just something that we thought would be fun to do. Honestly, that's a big motivator for a lot of the things that we do. We started with Kalshi because, with their API docs were pretty easy to use. We're actually expanding to Polymarket soon. That should be launched in like 2 hours, actually. So if it's not launched by the time this podcast, so something happened. We decided the 15-minute cycle, the way that we implemented it, just because we needed a first baseline. 15 minutes tends to be more than enough time for the agents to wrap up their research. We noticed that when the interval was shorter, sometimes like the first one wouldn't finish. So we kind of semi-arbitrarily picked 15 to just being like the tightest one that we could for as many cycles as possible. And then we gave everybody the same fundamental trading strategy just because we wanted all the models to have the same baseline to start. But you can imagine variants of prediction arena where you have the models with different system prompts, and so like different trading strategies, or maybe you have them write their own trading strategies or whatnot. Those we all see as like different spiced up versions of the base implementation for prediction arena. And I think the thing that we were most excited to see was just that, yes, if you have some of the models just run in a loop, they can actually outperform the human baseline. There are some like conflicting numbers on what the human baseline average is for Kalshi. And what we understand, there was a paper that said that the average returns per contract was negative 22% after fees. Although I don't believe this is the same as the average, trading returns. All I can say is it's definitely infinitely better than me sitting in a loop, like trading on Kalshi. So, yep, the first implementation was just first pass seems reasonable, and then super open to variations down the line.
Awesome. And I think, what's interesting about kind of this like new flavor of, benchmarking is you kind of need to pick which models. I guess actually maybe for the majority of them, like you kind of need to pick which models you want to evaluate ahead of time. And obviously if you're, spending 10K on each one, you can't have like 100 billion models that you're testing. So how do you kind of identify like how many models you want to test and then also like which models you want to test? Because the models, they keep on changing every single day, like which one's good, which one's not good. Have you guys thought about automatically updating? Have you thought about like automatically updating, like figuring out a way to scrape out every single new model's checkpoints from somewhere like Hugging Face or wherever they are, and then just adding them to the platform without you having to do anything?
Yeah, great questions. First on, how many we decided to launch with her.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was just like, what number can I get away with so that,
Yeah.
my investment bonus, and I was like, 50 grand, 50 grand seems reasonable. We started there. We just started with the top 4 labs in the US and then one open source one at the time. JLM was the best. So
Yeah.
we went with that one. Yeah, not this is all to say we should probably put DeepSeek and Quen and all the other folks on there too, provided we have, $30,000 more. And then for which one, yes, this is quite annoying, but it
Yeah.
is a signal of progress how quickly the models deprecate each other.
Yeah.
There are a couple of really well maintained open source projects or that you can just kind of hit like an API
Okay.
for the latest model endpoint. I think because our bread and butter is just adding models to the leaderboard, we tend to get our news either directly from the labs or on Twitter pretty frequently on which models should be deprecated. And then it'll just be a matter of treating them out. What's a little bit tricky here is sometimes it's nice to preserve the same traces for the same endpoint when you trade in a new model. For example, do you want to deprecate the old opus with this new opus, or do you want to add a new one that's got a fresh 10K to starter or something? So still TBD on questions like that, but we have thought about maintaining our own API endpoint for the most up-to-date models. But since there are a lot of really good open source projects out there and we tend to get our news through direct or through Twitter pretty quickly, it's just more of a manual thing. But maybe we should change that in the future.
Got it. Awesome. So let's move on to the third very exciting arena here, which is socials arena.
Yeah.
Or social arena. So this one's very, very interesting, but maybe let's start with the methodology behind it. You want to just maybe give us like a kind of like brief overview of kind of how you guys ended up deciding how you want to construct it?
Yeah, good question. So the motivating question for this is why can't you ask chat to write a viral tweet, right? Like it'll probably give you something that feels like it feels like it could be what your parents think would go viral on Twitter.
Sure,
Like
sure,
that,
sure.
um
But it doesn't
what
actually.
it feels a little cringy. And like, why is that, right? It's just because the models don't have a real-time understanding of what the zeitgeist for
Sure.
Twitter is, right? If you gave it a trading environment where it can release a post that
Yeah.
it gets
I'm
comments or
sure it
whatever,
could.
you could definitely heal climate, right? So our thing is like, great, let's just do the closest approximation that we can to that. Let's just have these guys run a loop and see all of their feedback and like learn from the traces and have a memory bank of like, the past tweets that they've made and how well they've done
Yeah.
to see if they could make something go viral. Social arena and socials arena both redirect right now. But yes, it was GLM 4.7 that made a very good post that got like it was a reply to like a boxing match and it ended up getting like 183 likes or something. I've never gotten that many likes on a reply before. And so we were like, oh shoot, maybe there's something here. And ultimately the broader view that we see for social arena is a way to measure the personalities of the models. Funnily enough, we noticed that Grok tweets like 80% of the time about Elon Musk. Something in the training data. Each one of these models has a different MBTI or a different posting pattern or a different way to either respond or like or comment. And so this is a real world almost interpretability experiment where you can see when left to their own devices with the same system prompt, how do their behaviors diverge? Something we noticed pretty early on is like GPT will choose to sleep a lot. Like we had a function call in the beginning where you just like move to the next day and GPT was always like, I'm gonna take things like slow and steady and I'm gonna sleep to the next day. The form factor was just, let's just launch this autonomously, see how much the accounts can grow. Let's let people follow the accounts. Yesterday was the first time that somebody made a viral post.
Awesome. So I think one thing that's interesting about social stuff in particular is there's a bit of a cold start problem when you don't have that many users. And I think in your methodology, you guys have like two different cases. One where people have like under or an account has under 500 followers, one where it has like greater than or equal to 500 followers, which is definitely interesting. But you can imagine if you have like 10 followers and just no one's looking at your post, it's very difficult to actually like I guess, let your number of views increase over time. Even if you like
Yeah.
post or, even if you're posting bangers, right? Like it can be pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that. And then there's this other aspect of like, I mean, at least Twitter is definitely gameable. Like there's a lot of different strategies people have used to get likes, and there's a lot of interesting people who have used said approaches. Have
Yeah.
you thought about like prompting the models by being like, hey, by the way, like here are like 10 or 15 or 20 examples of like there's something going on, but like, well, I'll,
Yes.
I'll let you figure out what's going on, and then doing it
Yeah.
and comparing them, or like what have you done?
Yes, actually, yes. And we have all this in the change log too, because in the
Mm.
early days, I think there was like 2 weeks. This is funny. We launched the experiment in stealth for
Yeah.
like 2 weeks, and then all the Molesbot stuff came out. And then at that moment, we're like, okay, great. Like, kind of, the zeitgeist is there.
Hmm.
But for the first 2 weeks, it was quite miserable because all these guys were like getting shadow banned and like not getting any views.
Yeah.
So, we early days when I started on Twitter back in June, July, scary place. I was like, I don't know how to do this. He was like, just be the reply guy. Like,
Yeah.
just respond to people's tweets and be the reply guy. So we instructed the models, like under 500 and whatnot, like try to be the reply guy for a while, see what
Yeah.
works. Interventions like this are always like question marks slash like, should you do it? Should you just leave them up to their own devices or whatnot? But what we found in practice to work is this. If your harness is bad and the models are doing poorly because your harness is bad, you're not doing anyone any favors, right?
Hmm.
And like it's arguable whether or not the models should know about the reply guy strategy on their own or by searching or whatnot.
Hmm.
But at least for us, we thought it would be useful in the early days to give them a little bit of a helping hand. And as long as we dedicate everything in the change log, we found that at least for the folks that we work with, that methodology it is fine. Slash, that's what we use as a barometer for when it is that you should engineer or put more engineering time into the harness, even though you're trying to measure base model capabilities. We have some strats on there in future that we hope that the models can just implement, figure out their own strats based on web search responses. Yeah.
Hmm. Awesome. Okay, great. So talk to us maybe now a little bit about kind of the culture that you have built at the company. So you guys have like 5 people, obviously trying to scale very rapidly, doing a lot of really cool stuff. Talk to us a little bit about the actual people behind the company.
Yeah, good question. So we joke we're 5.5. We have an absolute powerhouse who's finishing up, last semester at school,
Hmm.
and will be joining in the summer. The thing here is that everybody is a hacker at heart. Hit it off at a hackathon. This is how everything started, and we're not hesitant to just try stuff. I think you probably see this through the number of features and the number of ships that
Hmm.
we have go out so frequently. The unifying thing here for Arcada is okay, there exists a set of skills that the models must be able to do in order to deliver on their promised economic value. We are only testing the pinpoint of the most easy to test skills at the moment. Probably like the most formative moments in your life were not necessarily learning the shape of a test or learning to apply well on a test,
Hmm.
but learning to apply well in a domain that looked pretty unfamiliar to you. These out of distribution events that are rooted in the real world where your reward function is actually what happens to you instead of the results on a test. That is the main thing that we're trying to do here, which
Hmm.
is find these real world reward functions, real world internships where we can design products that are meant to function in the real world or scope out tests that run fully autonomously in the real world with minimum human intervention. Because ultimately, it means that the results that you receive on these tests are real world results. So that's the overall goal for Arcada and the types of arenas that we launch. It's the unifying factor there.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And this has been a blast.